Our two giant bobcats treat our baby like their own. What's happening is beyond words. Ethan, 33, a carpenter in a plaid shirt, emerged from the workshop, wiping his hands. Clara, I don't like them being so close to Sophie. The lynx are wild animals. Clara shook her head. They saved Sophie from a snake last week. I trust them. Ethan, matter of fact, frowned. I'm just worried. What if they get mad? But Clara, sensitive, saw love in the way Rusty and Ember looked at Sophie as if she were their whole world. To fully discover this touching and dramatic story, as well as find out if Ethan has a change of heart and what happens next for the family and their two special lynxes, subscribe, like, and listen to the whole story. The world dissolved into a primal scream, Clara's own, though it felt ripped from someone else. One moment, the crisp Montana air was filled with the scent of pine and Sophie's gurgling laughter from her playpen near the edge of the sprawling yard. The next, a blur of mottled gray-brown fur and a flash of teeth. A coyote, lean and desperate, had materialized from the dense woods bordering their property, its eyes fixed on the impossible, unthinkable prize, Sophie. Clara had been sketching the shifting patterns of sunlight on the distant Absaroka peaks, her back to the playpen for no more than 30 seconds. The first sound that registered wasn't the coyote, but a sound she'd come to associate with absolute, unyielding territoriality, a guttural, chest-rumbling snarl that vibrated the very air. She spun, her heart instantly a block of ice in her chest. Rusty, the larger of their two rescued bobcats, was a tawny streak, covering the 20 feet to the playpen in what felt like a nanosecond. He met the coyote mid-stride, a collision of wild fury. The air exploded with yelps, snarls, and the sickening thud of bodies. Ember, Rusty's smaller, fiercer counterpart, was a split second behind him, launching herself at the coyote's flank, a screaming, spitting embodiment of rage. Clara couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Sophie was wailing, a terrified, piercing sound that cut through the cacophony of the fight. The coyote, outmatched by the sheer ferocity of two adult bobcats fighting with a desperation Clara had never witnessed, yelped and twisted, trying to break free. Rusty had a hold of its throat, shaking his powerful head, while Ember raked bloody furrows down its side. It was over in less than a minute. The coyote, broken and whimpering, scrambled away, disappearing into the trees as silently as it had arrived, leaving behind tufts of fur and drops of blood on the trampled grass. Rusty and Ember didn't pursue. They stood, flanks heaving, fur bristling over the playpen. Rusty let out a low, shuddering growl, his gaze fixed on the woods, while Ember, after a tense moment, turned, leaped silently onto the playpen's edge, and peered down at Sophie. The baby's cries hitched. Clara finally found her legs, stumbling towards them, her mind a blank canvas of terror and a dawning, terrifying awe. What had she just seen? These were wild animals, predators. Yet they had just... The scene swam before her eyes. Sophie, still crying, but physically untouched. And these two feline guardians, smeared with the evidence of their brutal defense, standing sentinel. The word indescribable felt like a vast understatement for the maelstrom of shock and disbelief churning within her. The silence that followed the coyote's retreat was heavier than any sound. Clara reached Sophie, her hands trembling so violently she could barely unlatch the playpen. The baby clung to her, burying her face in Clara's neck, her small body racked with sobs. Over Sophie's shoulder, Clara met Rusty's gaze. His brilliant, pale green eyes, usually holding a wild, untamable light, were fixed on her and the child with an intensity that was almost possessive. Ember, still perched on the playpen rail, made a soft, chuffing sound, a noise Clara had learned to associate with a strange form of bobcat contentment. It had been 18 months since Rusty and Ember had come into their lives, a harsh winter then, much like the one now threatening to descend. Ethan had found them near the southern fence line, caught in illegal leg-hold traps, likely set by poachers crossing onto their land from the national forest. Rusty, the larger male, had a mangled front paw and was half-starved. Ember, slighter, but with an indomitable spirit, had been trapped for longer, judging by her emaciated state, her fur matted with ice and blood. Ethan, a man whose practicality usually outweighed sentiment, hadn't had the heart to leave them. Head called Doc Allen, the old veterinarian from Livingston, who'd guided him through freeing them and then made the arduous journey out to the farm. They're wild. Ethan, Clara, Doc Allen had warned, after patching them up as best he could in the sturdy, unused horse stall Ethan had quickly converted. Bobcats, they don't tame. Best you can hope for is they heal up and move on. Don't get attached. But moving on wasn't simple. Rusty's paw took months to heal, leaving him with a permanent limp. Ember, fiercely protective of her injured companion, refused to leave his side. Confined initially, then given the run of the large, enclosed barnyard, they'd remained aloof, wary of Clara and Ethan, accepting food but offering no hint of friendship. They were a wild, untamed presence on the periphery of their lives on the remote Montana acreage Clara had inherited from her grandfather. She, a wildlife photographer by passion and profession, found their elusive beauty captivating, while Ethan, a carpenter whose hands were more used to shaping wood than tending to wild animals, remained cautious, respectful, but distant. Then, 9 months ago, Sophie had been born. The change in the bobcats hadn't been immediate, but gradual, almost imperceptible at first. They'd started appearing closer to the house when Sophie was brought outside. Rusty would often settle on the porch railing, a silent, brooding sentinel, his gaze frequently drifting towards the baby's pram. Ember, more active, would occasionally stalk unseen through the tall grass near where Sophie played, her movements fluid and silent. Ethan's unease had grown. Clara, they're getting too comfortable, too close. It's not natural. They're just curious. Ethan, Clara had argued, though a knot of her own uncertainty would tighten. She'd spent hours watching them, her camera forgotten, trying to decipher their behavior. The inciting incident, the moment Clara's tentative hope began to solidify into a fragile belief, had occurred 2 months before the coyote attack. Sophie, then a 10-month-old crawler, had been on a blanket in the yard. Clara was a few feet away, weeding a stubborn patch of thistle. A low, urgent hiss from Ember, so close it made Clara jump, drew her attention. Ember was frozen, body low to the ground, eyes locked on a patch of grass near Sophie's hand. Coiled there, head raised, was a prairie rattlesnake, its tail a blur. Before Clara could scream or move, Rusty, who'd been dozing on the porch, launched himself. He didn't attack the snake directly, but landed heavily beside it, hissing and swatting, a terrifying display of feline aggression. The snake, startled and outmaneuvered, uncoiled and slithered rapidly away. Rusty had stood over the spot for a full minute, tail twitching, before turning his gaze to Sophie, then to Clara. There was no discernible emotion, just an intense, unwavering focus. That day, Clara had looked at these wild creatures, scarred and wary, and felt a profound, inexplicable shift. It wasn't just curiosity driving them. It was something deeper, something she couldn't yet name. The coyote attack had simply been the terrifying, undeniable confirmation. In the weeks that followed the coyote incident, an uneasy truce settled over the farm. Ethan, profoundly shaken by the bobcat's defense of Sophie, swung from deep gratitude to renewed anxiety. They saved her, Clara, I know. I saw it. But they're still wild. What if something spooks them? What if their instincts turn the wrong way? His pragmatic mind struggled to reconcile the image of the snarling, protective beasts with the potential danger they represented. He took to meticulously checking the perimeter fences, reinforcing the playpen, and always keeping a heavy wrench or a stout piece of lumber close at hand when Sophie was outside. Clara, on the other hand, found herself increasingly drawn to the enigma of Rusty and Ember. The raw, protective fury she had witnessed had etched itself into her mind, overriding years of ingrained caution about wild animals. She began to spend more time simply observing them, her camera now a tool to document their subtle interactions with Sophie and their environment. She captured Rusty, his scarred body a testament to a harsh life, positioning himself between Sophie's outdoor blanket and the dense tree line, his gaze sweeping the shadows. She photographed Ember, a sleek, fluid hunter, presenting a freshly caught field mouse, not to them, but near the porch steps, a gesture Clara didn't understand but felt was somehow significant. The bobcats, for their part, established unspoken rules. They never attempted to enter the house, though the door was often open in warmer weather. They tolerated Clara and Ethan's presence, even a cautious approach, but recoiled from any attempt at touch. Their focus remained almost entirely on Sophie. When Clara carried Sophie out to the porch swing, Rusty would often be found already settled on the far railing, a silent, tawny guardian. If Sophie cried, Ember would sometimes appear at the edge of the yard, her ears pricked, her body tense, until the crying subsided. "It's like they've adopted her," Clara mused one evening, looking at photos she'd taken. Rusty was a blur of motion, chasing off a two-boled raven that had landed near Sophie's stroller. Ethan grunted from behind his newspaper, or they see her as a cub, their cub. Bobcats are territorial, Clara. Maybe they see her as part of their territory now. But this is more than territory, Ethan. The way Ember watches her breathe when she's asleep in her pram on the porch. The way Rusty always positions himself between her and any perceived threat. Clara started a detailed journal, supplementing her photographs with notes on their behavior. She meticulously recorded their hunting patterns, their interactions with each other, which were often brief, almost businesslike, but clearly underpinned by a deep bond, and, most importantly, every nuanced interaction with Sophie. She noted how Rusty's low growl, once a sound that chilled her, now often served as an early warning for a deer straying too close, for a hawk circling overhead, even for the distant rumble of a truck on the county road miles away. Complications arose not just from Ethan's internal conflict, but from the outside world, however remote. Martha Henderson, their nearest neighbor, a kindly but gossipy woman who lived 2 miles down the road, stopped by with a casserole and a load of unsolicited advice after hearing a garbled version of the coyote story from the mailman. "Clara, dear," Martha began, her eyes wide with concern as she peered at Ember, who was currently perched on a woodpile, watching them with unnerving stillness. "It's just not safe. Bobcats are, well, they're varmints, aren't they? People around here shoot 'em on sight, mostly. To have them so close to a baby." She clucked her tongue. "You're a good mother, I know, but you're playing with fire." Clara tried to explain, to convey the unique circumstances, the rescue, the undeniable protectiveness. But Martha, like many, saw only the wild in the animals, the inherent, unpredictable danger. Her words, though well-intentioned, planted fresh seeds of doubt, not in what she had seen, but in her own judgment. Was she anthropomorphizing? Was she letting her photographer's eye for a unique story cloud her maternal responsibility? She even called Doc Allen again, recounting the coyote attack and the bobcats' day-to-day behavior. The old vet listened patiently. "Clara," he said finally, his voice gravelly, "I've been a country vet for 50 years. Seen a lot of strange things. Animals form bonds you wouldn't expect, but these are still bobcats. Their instincts are deeply ingrained. What they did for Sophie, that's remarkable. But don't ever let your guard down. Don't ever forget what they are." His words echoed Ethan's fears and Martha's warnings. Yet, every time Clara saw Rusty's steady, watchful gaze fixed on Sophie, or Ember's swift, silent intervention to chase away a buzzing hornet that had strayed too close to the baby's face, her conviction solidified. This was something beyond simple instinct, something verging on devotion. The tension between this burgeoning belief and the persistent, rational fear was a constant hum beneath the surface of their isolated lives. The more she observed, the more she photographed, the more questions she had. The most pressing one, the one that kept her up at night, was simply why? Why, Sophie? Why this extraordinary, almost unbelievable display of interspecies guardianship? The answer to Clara's persistent Y arrived on a raw, blustery, late October afternoon, nearly a month after the coyote attack. The incident itself had become a defining moment. Ethan, though still outwardly cautious, had subtly changed. He no longer voiced his objections to the bobcat's proximity to Sophie with the same frequency or intensity. Clara would often find him watching them, a strange, conflicted expression on his face, a mixture of awe and a residual, ingrained wariness. He had even started leaving scraps of leftover deer meat from his last hunting trip near the old barn, a silent acknowledgement of their role. The day of the revelation, Clara had been going through old veterinary records for their livestock, a task she usually put off. Tucked into a folder labeled Miscellaneous Wildlife, Unpaid, she found Doc Allen's original notes from when Rusty and Ember were first brought in. Much of it was medical jargon, descriptions of their injuries, treatments administered. But at the bottom of Ember's sheet, a scribbled, almost illegible note caught her eye. Female, approx. 3-4 wawars. Evidence of recent lactation. Possible loss of litter prior to trapping. Extreme agitation and defensive aggression noted. Prognosis guarded. Evidence of recent lactation. Possible loss of litter. The words leapt out at Clara, hitting her with the force of a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat. She sank into the worn office chair, the flimsy paper trembling in her hand. Pictures, fragmented memories, and observations suddenly clicked into place with startling, painful clarity. Ember's almost frantic initial defensiveness, her gauntness that went beyond mere starvation, Rusty's fierce protection of her even when he himself was grievously injured, and now their unwavering, intense focus on Sophie. She grabbed the phone, her fingers fumbling as she dialed Doc Allen's number. He picked up on the third ring, his voice a familiar, reassuring rumble. "Doc," Clara began, her voice tight with emotion. "It's Clara Dubois. About Rusty and Ember, your old notes. You wrote Ember might have lost kittens." There was a pause on the other end. Then Doc Allen sighed, a heavy, weary sound. I remember that. Poor creatures. It was just a guess. Mind you, based on her physical state, looked like she'd been nursing not too long before they got caught in those damn traps. It's common enough, a mother losing her young to predators, starvation, or traps. Often happens they're still producing milk, still full of those mothering hormones with no outlet for them. Makes them, well, it can make them act in unpredictable ways. Clara closed her eyes, a wave of profound understanding washing over her, followed by a surge of such intense empathy it brought tears to her eyes. "So, Sophie," she whispered, her voice thick. "Could be," Doc Allen said softly. "Could be they've imprinted in a way. Or maybe it's simpler. Maybe they see a small, helpless creature, and those thwarted instincts kick in, and nature's a strange, powerful thing. Clara, sometimes it finds a way to heal, or at least to redirect. That kind of loss, it's devastating for any mother, human or animal." After she hung up, Clara sat in silence for a long time, the vet's words echoing in her mind. She walked out onto the porch. The wind was sharp, carrying the first hint of snow. Rusty was in his usual spot on the railing, a stoic, furry statue against the darkening sky. Ember was a few yards away, meticulously grooming her forepaw, but her ears swiveled towards Clara as she approached. Sophie was napping inside, warm and safe. Clara looked at these two wild animals, survivors of cruelty and profound loss, and saw them not as dangerous predators, but as fellow beings who had suffered. Their protectiveness of Sophie was no longer just a remarkable anomaly. It was a heartbreakingly poignant expression of displaced parental love. They hadn't just saved Sophie from a coyote or a snake. They were, in their own way, mothering her, guarding her with the fierce, unwavering devotion they would have shown their own lost young. Ethan found her there as dusk settled, her face streaked with tears. She told him what Doc Allen had said, her voice choked with emotion. He listened without interruption, his gaze fixed on Rusty, who hadn't moved. When she finished, the silence stretched, filled only by the mournful sigh of the wind through the pines. Finally, Ethan reached out, not to Clara, but slowly, hesitantly, towards Rusty. The bobcat tensed, his ears flattening slightly, but he didn't flinch away. Ethan's calloused hand hovered inches from Rusty's head for a long moment before he let it drop. He turned to Clara, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "All this time," he said, his voice rough, "I've been worried about what they might do to her." He shook his head, a look of dawning comprehension on his face. And all along, they were just being parents. It was a turning point. The fear, though perhaps never entirely absent, was now overshadowed by a profound understanding and a shared quiet grief for the bobcat's lost family. From that day on, Clara and Ethan were no longer just observers or cautious caretakers. They were witnesses to a deep, instinctual, and incredibly moving bond. The dynamic on the farm shifted. The bobcats were no longer just the bobcats. They were Rusty and Ember, Sophie's fierce, silent, four-legged guardians. The point of no return had been crossed. Their lives were now inextricably intertwined with these two wild, grieving, and loving souls. The revelation about Rusty and Ember's lost kittens cast their subsequent actions in a new, poignant light. Winter descended on Montana with its customary ferocity, blanketing the farm in heavy snow. Life contracted, revolving around the warmth of the wood stove and the necessities of survival in their isolated haven. Yet, the bobcat's vigilance over Sophie never wavered. If anything, it intensified. Clara documented it all. Rusty, his thicker winter coat making him appear even larger, would often create a trampled path in the snow around the areas where Sophie might be, even if just for a few minutes of crisp air on the enclosed porch. He'd sit for hours, seemingly impervious to the biting wind, his gaze fixed on the distant snow-laden trees, a silent, brooding guardian. Ember, agile and light-footed, would patrol the perimeter of the house, her tracks the only sign of her passage until she'd suddenly appear on a windowsill, peering in at Sophie playing on the rug. Ethan, his transformation from skeptic to believe her, now complete, took it upon himself to ensure the bobcats were well provisioned through the harsh winter. He set up a sheltered feeding station near the barn, well away from the house to maintain some boundary, but stocked it regularly with meat scraps and occasionally a road-killed rabbit he'd find. He never acknowledged it directly to Clara, but she'd see him heading out in the pre-dawn gloom, and later notice the bobcat's tracks leading to and from the spot. Sophie, growing into a toddler, began to recognize her protectors. She would babble at them, pointing with a mittened hand from the safety of Clara's arms or the porch. "Kitty," she'd exclaim, a word she used for all furry creatures. Rusty would sometimes respond with a slow blink, an almost imperceptible softening of his fierce eyes. Ember might offer a soft, throaty chuff. These small interactions were treasures Clara hoarded, capturing them with her camera whenever possible. The photos were no longer just documentation. They were a testament to an extraordinary, almost sacred, trust. One particularly brutal blizzard trapped them for nearly a week. Snowdrifts piled against the doors and windows, and the wind howled like a banshee. During the worst of it, the power flickered and died. They were plunged into a world lit only by oil lamps and the glow from the wood stove. Sophie, sensitive to the change and the oppressive atmosphere, grew fretful. It was during these long, dark hours that the bobcat's presence became an even greater comfort. They couldn't come inside, but their faint, occasional chuffs and growls from the sheltered porch, their fleeting shadows against the frosted panes, were reassurances that they were still out there, still watchful. One evening, as the storm raged, a loud crash from the direction of the chicken coop sent Ethan scrambling for his shotgun. "Stay here with Sophie," he yelled to Clara, plunging out into the maelstrom. Clara's heart pounded. Coyotes, driven by hunger, could be bold during such storms. Or worse, a desperate wolf or even a bear disturbed from its den. She waited, minutes stretching into an eternity, Sophie whimpering in her arms. Then she heard it, not a gunshot, but a series of furious snarls and hisses, unmistakably Rusty and Ember, followed by a panicked squawking, and then silence. Ethan returned, covered in snow, his face grim but relieved. "Fox," he said, shaking his head. "A big one, bold as brass, tried to tear right through the wire. By the time I got there, Rusty and Ember had it treed up the old cottonwood. Didn't even need the gun. They just escorted it off the property like a couple of bouncers." He looked towards the porch, where two pairs of green eyes glowed faintly in the lamplight. "They're earning their keep, those two." The incident, though minor compared to the coyote attack, further solidified the bobcats' role. They weren't just protecting Sophie, they were protecting the whole farmstead, their territory, which now unequivocally included the Dubois family. As winter began its slow retreat, yielding to the first tentative signs of spring, Clara felt a sense of anticipation. Sophie was on the cusp of walking. Her first birthday was approaching. Clara envisioned a small, quiet celebration, just the three of them, and, in their own way, Rusty and Ember. She found herself looking at her daughter Then at the bobcats, a profound sense of gratitude welling up. These wild animals, through their own tragic loss, had gifted her family with an unparalleled sense of security and a daily reminder of the unexpected, resilient nature of love. She began to compile her photographs and journal entries, not for publication, but for Sophie, a record of her unique babyhood, guarded by two magnificent, mysterious creatures. Sometimes, looking at the images, Ember's intense gaze on a sleeping Sophie, Rusty standing like a statue against a fiery sunset, both of them a blur of fur defending their charge, Clara would feel a pang, a dark night of the soul, in a way, not of fear, but of sorrow for what Rusty and Ember had lost, and a deep, almost painful awareness of the fragility and preciousness of the bond they had all formed. What would happen as Sophie grew older? Would the bond remain, or would the wild call them away eventually? For now, she pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the present, on the quiet miracle unfolding daily in their secluded corner of Montana. The anticipation for Sophie's birthday felt like a build-up to something significant, a quiet culmination of a year filled with terror, wonder, and an indescribable connection. Sophie's first birthday dawned bright and clear, a perfect late spring day in Montana. The wildflowers were beginning to paint the meadows, and the air hummed with the promise of summer. Clara had baked a small cake, and Ethan had fashioned a tiny wooden swing from a sturdy branch of the old oak tree in the yard. They invited Martha Henderson and Doc Allen, the only two people outside their small family unit who had any real inkling of the unique situation with Rusty and Ember. Martha arrived armed with a knitted sweater for Sophie and a healthy dose of curiosity. Doc Allen brought his old leather bag, just in case, but his eyes twinkled with genuine interest. They set up a blanket under the oak tree. Sophie, dressed in a new denim overall dress, was in high spirits, clapping her hands and babbling at the colorful balloons Ethan had tied to the porch railing. Rusty was a predictable fixture on that railing, observing the proceedings with his usual stoic intensity. Ember was less visible, a fleeting shadow at the edge of the woods. Her presence felt more than seen. After a small lunch, Clara set Sophie down on the grass. The baby had been taking tentative, wobbly steps for a few weeks, but mostly preferred to crawl or be carried. Today, however, something was different. Perhaps it was the excitement, the presence of new faces, or the sheer beauty of the day. Sophie pushed herself up, her little legs trembling, and took one step, then another, her arms outstretched for balance. Clara and Ethan watched, breathless, afraid to move or speak lest they break the spell. Martha let out a small gasp. Doc Allen leaned forward, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. Sophie took a third step, then a fourth, directly towards the porch railing where Rusty was perched. He didn't move, but his ears swiveled forward, his gaze locked on the approaching child. She was halfway there, unsteady but determined, when her little foot caught on a tuft of grass. She wobbled, her arms windmilling, and then, with a surprised cry, she began to fall. Before Clara or Ethan could react, Rusty launched himself from the railing. It wasn't the aggressive, predatory leap she'd seen him use against the coyote or the snake. This was different. He landed softly, almost impossibly so for an animal of his size and power, right beside Sophie as she toppled. He didn't touch her, not directly. Instead, he lowered his big, tawny head and nudged her gently, almost imperceptibly, with his shoulder, breaking her fall, guiding her into a soft tumble onto the grass rather than a hard impact. Sophie, surprised rather than hurt, sat up and looked at him. Rusty remained beside her, his body a warm, furry barrier. Then Ember materialized, silent as a whisper, on Sophie's other side. She let out a series of soft, rumbling chuffs and gently licked Sophie's outstretched hand. Once, a gesture so unexpected and tender it made Clara's heart ache. Sophie, far from being scared, reached out a chubby hand and patted Rusty's broad head. "Kitty," she declared, a wide, joyous smile spreading across her face. "Nice kitty." Rusty endured the pat, his eyes half closed. Ember nudged Sophie's hand again, as if in encouragement. Martha Henderson had tears streaming down her face. "Well, it'll be," she whispered, fumbling for a handkerchief. "I've never seen anything like it. Never." Doc Allen was beaming. "Indescribable, isn't it?" he said quietly to Clara and Ethan. "Simply indescribable." Clara felt Ethan's arm go around her shoulders. She was crying too, silent tears of overwhelming emotion, gratitude, love, and a profound sense of wonder at the beautiful, impossible scene unfolding before them. This was it, the culmination of everything. Not a dramatic confrontation, but a moment of pure, unadulterated, interspecies tenderness. The story of Sophie's first steps, guided by her bobcat guardians, became a quiet legend in their small corner of Montana. Martha, true to form, spread the tale, though even she struggled to convey the sheer emotional impact of what she'd witnessed, often ending her account with a shake of her head and a heartfelt, "You just had to be there." Life on the farm settled into a new rhythm, one where the presence of Rusty and Ember was an accepted, cherished part of their existence. They remained wild, their instincts sharp, their movements economical and purposeful. They still hunted, still patrolled their territory, but always, always their primary focus was Sophie, as she grew from a toddling baby into a curious little girl. They were her constant, silent companions. Rusty, with his patient stoicism, would allow her to sit near him, chattering away, while he kept his watch. Ember, more aloof but fiercely protective, would often herd Sophie away from the denser parts of the woods or the rushing creek at the bottom of their property, her low growls a clear, gentle warning. Clara continued to photograph them, her collection of images growing into a stunning visual narrative of an improbable family. She never sought wider fame with the pictures, content to keep them as a private testament for Sophie. The indescribable nature of their bond was best kept within the sanctity of their unique experience. Years passed. Sophie started school, taking the long bus ride into Livingston each day. Ethan built a sturdy enclosed bus stop at the end of their long driveway, and every morning, without fail, two tawny shapes would emerge from the tree line as the bus approached, watching until Sophie was safely aboard. They'd often still be there, or emerge again as if summoned, when the bus returned in the afternoon. The bus driver, a grizzled old local named Hank, had long ago stopped being surprised. He'd just tip his hat and say, "Morning, protectors." Rusty's muzzle was now tinged with gray, his movements a little stiffer, especially in the cold. Ember remained agile, but her intense green eyes held a lifetime of watchfulness. The raw grief Clara had once sensed in them had softened, replaced by a quiet dedication that was deeply moving. They had lost their own young, a tragedy that had inexplicably led them to Sophie, and in guarding her, perhaps they had found a measure of healing, a purpose that transcended the harsh laws of nature. One crisp autumn evening, with Sophie, now a bright 7-year-old, doing her homework at the kitchen table, Clara looked out the window. Under the harvest moon, two silhouettes sat side by side on the familiar porch railing, gazing out over the darkened fields. Her giant bobcats. Their presence was a constant, a profound reassurance. She thought of Doc Allen's words from so long ago. Nature's a strange, powerful thing. Sometimes it finds a way to heal. Clara smiled. What had happened, and continued to happen, on their remote Montana farm was still, in many ways, indescribable. But it was also undeniably real, a testament to a love that knew no boundaries of species, a wild, resilient love that had, against all odds, found its home.